with our discussion of listening to Chazaras Hashatz. When we last left our heroes, we were discussing proper ways in which to respond Amen after the blessings and when it was proper to say it, and also to pay attention. We're going to continue in these laws for today to wrap up today's Siman, and moving right along, we are getting very, very close to wrapping these things up. Just a few more left before we finish laws of tefillah. Everyone who's been here since the beginning. Thank you for sticking with it. Okay, so halacha 9. We're in 124. Halacha number 9. If there are a few people responding Amen, and they take too long, or longer than it should take, you don't need to wait for them. So, as we learned before, you need to have a kamatz under the aleph, and you need to make sure that the serei is not chatuf. Okay, so that is appropriate way to pronounce it. So if those are all done correctly, then you don't need to wait for people who are dragging out unnecessarily the amen. Okay, so that's an important part of it. So what does it mean, part of it? Okay, so this is an interesting thing. So the Mishnah explains, so it's only a few of them. Now, for the majority of the congregation, you have to wait, just like you do with all forms of prayer. You shouldn't start the blessing that's after it until you have completed it, okay? Which is to let them finish answering Amen. That's what Shemona Esrei. Now, by Kaddish, the rule is the same. You should not start saying the second paragraph in it, which is Yisbarach v'yishtabach, until they finish saying Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach La'olam Almei Almaya. When that finishes, then you start with Yisbarach v'yishtabach. In every single case like this, however, with our great and many sins, many people stumble upon this problem, that when they daven in front of the congregation, okay, they are rushing to start the next bracha immediately after they finish the previous one, and they don't let people say Amen. And that's just not the proper thing to do. I'm sorry. The camera did something weird. Okay. So that's not appropriate. You also don't have to wait for the other people in the middle, right? Just when you hear most congregation finish, that's fine. Okay, now, if a person is doing this, the Shari Tshuva, quoted in the Mishnah over here, says that you just don't answer Amen at all. So if there's somebody leading the congregation and they're rushing through the blessings and they don't give you time to say Amen, you just don't answer. I mean, the truth, it doesn't say what to do after that, but what it also means is that you shouldn't let them be a shliach tzibur. Or you do what we like to call goa rimbo. This is me. This is not the Mishnah versus me, which is you yell at them, slow down, let people say Amen. And if you need to throw the book at them, you can throw the Mishnah Berurah at them, right? But nicely, so they could actually access it, right? So bring it out, show them right here in the Mishnah Berurah. Okay. So we say that you don't have to wait, the person making the bracha. Now, this rule is only because you're repeating Shemona Esrei, and most people there know it. So Mishnah Berurah explains that this is because the bracha is not an obligation that you're trying to share with the other person, or at least on the majority of people who are there. However, if you are acting in their stead to fulfill their obligation, whether you are the shliach tzibur or you're some other person making a blessing on someone's behalf, you must wait, meaning you need to pause, let them say Amen, and then go on to the next bracha. Okay? Even those people who say Amen too long, because they have to hear the bracha, and then that way they fulfill their obligation. Okay? So be patient with small groups if they're trying to fill the obligation, but otherwise, it's not appropriate to do that. So there's three things we learn, right? Don't if you're leading, don't rush the bracha, and also if you're leading, make sure that people who need to hear it hear the whole thing. Let them say amen, and then go on to the next bracha. And then the people who are listening, make sure you respond to amen, and make sure you don't say it too long. And say it, and if you want to say it correctly, read number 8, halacha 8. Okay, now here's a fun halacha. Okay, someone forgot to say Ya'alev Yavo on Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so there's a paragraph. Since you're kind of jumping in the middle of this, there's a paragraph added in within the last 3 blessings, which is just, it's not coming to my head immediately. It comes before Sechazena. Ritzei. In the middle of the paragraph, Ritzei. Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu v'Yam Chaisel v'Yisrosam v'Hasheves Ha'avodah. The bracha of Ritzei. And in the middle of that bracha, you say the paragraph of Ya'alev Yavo. You also say Ya'alev Yavo on Chol Moed in that paragraph. Okay? And we learned previously, okay, back in Kuf Yud Daled, that if you missed these paragraphs on Rosh Chodesh and on Ya'alev and on Chol Moed, Ya'alev Yavo, that you have to repeat your Shemona Esrei. So now we have a different question over here. We dealt with it a little bit there, and this is really the main source for it. If you didn't say that paragraph of Ya'alev Yavo, okay, whether on Rosh Chodesh or Chol Moed or any other time when you were required to repeat the Shemona Esrei because you missed it, you may focus your intention and hear the Shliach Tzibur, all 18 blessings, from beginning until end, like someone who is saying Shemona Esrei, like someone having Shemona Esrei sit on their behalf. Make no breaks, do not talk, take your 3 steps forward and back, because even though you already did your prayer, but you forgot this one thing and you didn't mention it, so even though you are knowledgeable, you can still have the Shliach Tzibur fulfill your obligation. Okay, so fun little clause to fix something, right? Fix something. So the Mishna goes on the statement of anything. So he says that even implies that he forgot to say Mashiv Haruach U'Merid HaGeshem in the first 3 blessings, during the winter times. Okay, and he says that is clearly from the Or Zarua. I mean, that was one of the things that's actually mentioned. And he says it's actually mentioned in the work Shari Tshuva in Kuf Yud Daled, number 8. And we'll talk more about it in the next chapter as well, chapter 126. Okay, and we'll talk about more things over there. So you focus your intention, he says. So even though we paskin that a Shliach Tzibur only fulfills the obligation of someone who doesn't know the prayer service, this is different because you prayed but forgot to add something. And you didn't say this particular paragraph. Therefore, even though you know the Shemona Esrei, the Shliach Tzibur can still fulfill your obligation. Okay? Now, most Achronim argue and say that you should actually repeat it yourself because people can't pay attention. Okay? So, and so maybe you're just not going to listen so closely. Okay, then you're gonna miss something, and that's gonna screw it up. And so, and he says also, furthermore, if the guy who is leading the services, he swallows the words, you can't hear all of them. Well, you really can't rely on him to do it, and then you have to say it yourself. If the individual said all sections correctly and then the Chazan omits something, does this matter to that individual? Well, you actually have to make the Chazan go back. So you have to yell at them to go say it correctly. Good question. Where was I? Okay. So you have to listen from beginning to end. So in the work Birkei Yosef, okay, he says you don't say Modim Derabanan. Rather, you listen the regular Modim. Okay, and nowadays that there are certain people who recite the Modim quietly, then you can't fulfill your obligation. But they're doing it wrong again. If they say it quietly, you haven't done it correctly. And he says, I don't know why they have this custom of reciting their section quietly. So even the place where congregations recite Modim Derabanan very loudly, nonetheless, you still should have it loud enough to fulfill people's obligations, and you have to say it somewhat loud enough for them to be able to hear it, and at least for 10 people to hear it. So I don't understand why. Another one of those things that we don't understand why people do certain things the way they do. Now, just to point it out, what's not suggested over here, which definitely could be suggested, is that if you screw it up, you should repeat it. I don't know why the Mishnah doesn't suggest that. But if any of the things fail, then just go repeat the Shemona Esrei. So I don't know why you need to get yourself into a place of bracha she'ein tzricha when you could rely. No one's saying not to rely on Shulchan Aruch. They're saying, well, these things could go wrong. So I don't know why the suggestion isn't just see if they do it right, or if they're a person who generally does it right, I can tell you honestly that where I go to daven, you could rely on them. They do everything right, So I don't know. Maybe they were just people made these statements in places where it was much more common to not do that, and that's why they wrote the way that they did. Okay, halacha 11. If you are in the middle of prayer, okay, and what we mean is you're in the middle of saying the Amidah, you're saying the Shemona Esrei. And the Shliach Tzibor finishes the bracha, and then before people finish their own amen, you're like at the very end, okay? You're wrapping it up, and so you hear while you're finishing that he's wrapping up the bracha, and you're wrapping up your Shemona Esrei. Okay, and these things happen to coincide at that exact moment. You can say amen with them. The Ramah adds, even if you didn't hear the bracha at all, you just hear the shliach, the tzibur, right? The community is answering amen, and you know which bracha you're saying it on. You may say amen with them. Okay, kind of where they are, but you didn't hear it. Okay, and so too with Kadesh, Kedusha, and Baruch Hu. Okay. So if you didn't hear it, but you know where they are, right? So that was we mentioned this machlokas earlier. So the Mishnah Berurah explains that we explained in Siman Ches and Sif Ches, right? We talk about the different ways of amen, that you have to say amen immediately after they finish the bracha, because otherwise you're saying an amen without a bracha to it. That's called the amen yisoma, right? The orphaned amen, which you don't allow that. Nonetheless, over here, if they didn't finish the amen, okay, then you could go ahead and still jump in with this blessing. And so therefore you're considered included in that. And then when you answer amen, you are part of the congregation that's finishing the word amen. Okay. Now the Taz, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he says no. you can still do it even after they finish it, because as long as you were right after them, that's fine too. However, most people tend to side with the Shulchan Aruch, and there's a big discussion in the Biur Halacha, which we won't get into right now. Okay, so where are you finishing? So Mishnah Berurah explains that you're in the verse Yul Ratzon, okay, and you've already said the whole big paragraph ahead of that, which is what we said in Siman 122, okay, at the very beginning over there. So that's what we're talking about. Now, even if you're in the middle of it, okay, so the Ramah is saying that the Mishnah Berurah explains that Ramah is saying that even though he is adding on to the language of the Shulchan Aruch and isn't really making a change on it, he says that you still know what bracha you're on. This is still consistent mostly with his own opinion back in Halacha 8 above, because if you don't know which bracha you're on, that's also considered the Amen Yisoma. So he kind of agrees, but is also consistent with his own opinion. Okay, and we said also further here in the Ramah's opinion that you hear the tzibur, the community, saying Amen, and the Mishnah Berurah explains this is so too if you hear a single person say Amen, okay, like you're very far back in the back, and you know what bracha they're up to, okay, you can use that as a signal to say Amen with him. But the reason why we say it's the community is because the Shulchan Aruch himself is talking about being in the middle of the community, even though this rule is the same. Okay? And really, the Shulchan Aruch is only allowing you to do it is before the Amen is done from everybody. Excuse me. Okay, but if a few people are still saying Amen, well, you know, it's really as if no one's saying Amen anymore, and you shouldn't respond. Okay. But if there's no community except that one person saying Amen, you could say Amen along with him. And that's consistent with that. So the Ramah also says that this rule applies to Kaddish and all the other things too, because as long as most of the community is still in the middle of responding, you can answer with them, even though you didn't hear the blessing yourself from the Shlich Tzibur. And we discussed this a little bit in Siman Nun Vav and Nun Zayin, back with the laws of Shema and the brachas of Shema. And we talk more about that in depth over there. Okay, so here's an important last thing. The last halacha here is one who responds Amen should not raise their voice above every other person making the blessing. So don't be the loudest guy in the room. Okay? Why? Because it says, Gadlu la Hashem iti unarom mashmo yachtav. Okay? It says, do it with me and with us. We should sound like we're one thing together. Okay? So don't be loud on our bells. Be the same sound. So too, when it comes to Baruch Hu and with responding to a Zimun for the beginning of Berachos Hamazon, like choir. Yeah, blend. Exactly. Good point. You should, so too, with all the other things, you should not make yourself louder than the person initially doing the blessings. Now, if the idea of raising your voice is to get people to pay more attention so that they should also answer, that would be okay. Okay? So, for example, if you're trying to teach little children to say Amen, okay, you need to say Amen after their blessings as well. Okay? However, a person who is considered crazy, a shotat, right? A person who has diminished capacity, you should not say Amen after their bracha, because they're not obligated to mitzvahs at all. Okay, so he says that this is explained further by the Pri Megadim, which is that it's talking about people who are reciting something where they don't know what they're reciting it to. However, a person who is considered deaf but speaks, just is deaf and can't communicate, they're obligated to mitzvahs, therefore you answer after them. And also, too, if women say a blessing on a mitzvah aseh shazman garma, you also say a bracha after them as well, because it is a valid bracha. Okay, so those things are all cool to do. We have an extra couple minutes. I'll just want to go back on a couple of things over here. We're going to look back at some laws in beforehand, talking about Kaddish and Kedusha. So we mentioned that in Section 56, we're talking about responding to the Kaddish. You have to pay attention to how you respond to it. So what we say over there, okay, here's the reference that the Mishna was making earlier. I'm just turning to it here real quick. Okay, so in the Ramah, that you should not, we say over here that you should not, right at the end of the Shulchan Aruch, you should not answer loudly, but you should really blend into them. Okay? Okay, so in the Mishna says over there, extending this rule we say over here, which is, this is the Mishna in 56:9. It says, even if you just walked in, and they're saying the Amen Yehesh Rabbah, okay, so even though they're at the end of it, nonetheless, you can still respond the Yehesh Rabbah as well. But don't say the Amen at the beginning of it, because you didn't hear the first paragraph. So that's an important thing I want to add over here. But Yehesh Rabbah Varach, okay, that's okay, and it's still pertinent to the second paragraph. Okay, now what about by Kedusha? If you come into Kedusha, okay, then you can go ahead and start saying that before they finish off each line. So, however, if you hear the main part, you could say that with the tzibur. Okay. That you know that you're referring to the first half. Okay. So that is some further explanation of the Mishnah Berurah, above what we currently learned. So we just finished 124. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We will pick up next week with 125 as we finish up the laws. Next, we're going to talk about Kedusha, how to respond to Kedusha. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.